My name is Margaret Williams, and I'm 58 years old. 3 weeks ago, my only son Michael called me with news that would shatter my world in ways I never imagined possible. I was sitting in my favorite armchair, the one his father and I had picked out together 30 years ago, when the phone rang. "Mom, I need to talk to you about the wedding." Michael's voice carried that familiar distant tone he'd developed over the past few years, the tone that always made my stomach clench with unspoken dread. "Of course, sweetheart. What do you need? I've been looking at dress options and I found the most beautiful. We've decided to keep it really small, Mom, just immediate family." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. I felt my heart stop beating for what seemed like an eternity. "But I am immediate family, Michael. I'm your mother. You know what I mean. Sarah's parents, her sister, my dad. We're talking maybe 20 people total. It's going to be very intimate." The casual way he included his father, my ex-husband who had abandoned us both when Michael was 12, while excluding me, felt like a physical blow. My hands trembled as I gripped the phone tighter, trying to process what I was hearing. "I don't understand. I raised you, Michael. I was there for every soccer game, every school play, every fever in the middle of the night. I helped you through college, supported you when you were job hunting. How am I not immediate family?" "It's not about that, Mom. It's just Sarah and I want to start fresh, clean slate. We don't want any drama or complications." Drama, complications. These were the words my son used to describe his relationship with the woman who had sacrificed everything for him. I had worked double shifts as a nurse for 15 years to put him through college. I had gone without new clothes, vacations, and countless small luxuries, so he could have opportunities I never had. "When is it?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Next Saturday, at the Riverside Country Club." The Riverside Country Club, the most expensive venue in our city. So much for keeping it small and intimate. The irony wasn't lost on me that he could afford to exclude me from a wedding that probably cost more than my annual salary. As if reading my thoughts, he added, "We'll send you a Livestream link. You can watch from home." Watch from home. Like I was some distant relative or casual acquaintance, not the woman who had brought him into this world and raised him single-handedly for 6 years until I remarried briefly, then alone again, when that marriage failed too. After I hung up, I sat in that chair for hours, staring at the phone, waiting for it to ring again, waiting for him to call back and say it was all a mistake, that of course I was invited, that he couldn't imagine his wedding day without me there. But the call never came. That night, I lay awake replaying every moment of our relationship, trying to figure out where I had gone wrong. Had I been too protective, too involved, too loving? How does a mother's love become something her child wants to escape from? The Livestream link arrived in my email 3 days later, with no accompanying message, just a cold, digital invitation to watch my son's most important day from the outside, like a stranger peering through a window at a life that had moved on without me. Now, as I sit here preparing to watch my son get married without me, I can't help but wonder, where did I lose him? And more importantly, is there any way to get him back? The golden boy I raised. To understand how we got here, I need to take you back to the beginning. Michael wasn't just my son, he was my miracle. After 3 miscarriages and years of fertility treatments that drained our savings and nearly destroyed my marriage to his father, David, Michael finally arrived on a snowy December morning in 1990. From the moment I held him, I knew he was everything I had ever wanted. Those first few years were magical. David was still present then, still pretending to be the family man he'd promised to be when we married. We lived in a modest 2-bedroom house in Riverside Heights, the kind of neighborhood where mothers pushed strollers down tree-lined streets and fathers coached Little League on weekends. Michael was an easy baby, all smiles and laughter. He reached every milestone early, walking at 10 months, speaking in full sentences by 18 months. I documented everything, filled photo album after photo album with pictures of his first steps, first words, first day of school. I was that mother, the one who volunteered for every school committee, organized elaborate birthday parties, and made sure her child never wanted for anything. When Michael was 6, David left us for his secretary. Classic story, really. He said he felt trapped and needed to find himself. What he found was a 24-year-old blonde with no stretch marks and no expectations beyond expensive dinners and weekend getaways. The divorce was swift and brutal. David promised to stay involved with Michael, but within a year, his visits became sporadic. By the time Michael turned 10, we were lucky to see David on major holidays. That's when I became everything to Michael: mother, father, best friend, and biggest cheerleader. I worked days at the hospital and evenings at a clinic to make ends meet. I drove him to soccer practice, helped with homework, attended every game and school event. When other kids had both parents in the bleachers, Michael had me, cheering twice as loud to make up for the empty space beside me. I remarried when Michael was 14 to a kind man named Tom, who tried his best to be a father figure. But Michael was already forming his own opinions about family and loyalty. He was polite to Tom, but distant, and I found myself caught between trying to build a new marriage and maintaining my special bond with my son. The marriage lasted 3 years before Tom gently suggested that maybe Michael and I needed to work on our boundaries. "You're not his friend, Margaret," Tom said during one of our final conversations. "You're his mother. There's a difference." I didn't understand what he meant then. I thought being close to your child was a good thing. I thought being his confidant, his safe harbor, his biggest supporter was what good mothers did. I thought I was giving him the love and attention his father had denied him. Michael thrived academically and socially despite our family turmoil. He was student body president, captain of the debate team, and had a scholarship to State University. I was so proud of him, so sure that all my sacrifices had been worth it. When he graduated summa cum laude with a degree in business, I felt like I had won the lottery. He got a job at a prestigious marketing firm in the city, moved into a nice apartment, and started dating Sarah Collins, a corporate lawyer from one of the old money families in town. Sarah was everything I wasn't: polished, sophisticated, from a family that had never known financial struggle. She had the kind of effortless elegance that comes from generations of privilege, the kind of confidence that comes from never having to choose between paying the electric bill and buying groceries. I tried to like Sarah, I really did. I invited her to Sunday dinners, asked about her work, complimented her outfits. But I could see the way she looked at our modest home, the way she politely declined my homemade meals in favor of just having eaten. More concerning was the way Michael began to change around her. He started canceling our traditional monthly dinners, claiming work was too busy. He stopped calling as often, and when he did, our conversations became shorter and more superficial. He began speaking differently, using phrases like "going forward" and "at the end of the day," corporate speak that felt foreign coming from the boy who used to tell me everything. The first time Sarah corrected my grammar at dinner, I saw Michael's face flush with embarrassment. Not embarrassment for her rudeness, but embarrassment for me. That's when I knew I was losing him. Not to another woman, but to a version of himself that no longer had room for where he came from. But I never imagined it would come to this. I never thought the boy I raised would exclude me from the most important day of his life, processing the rejection. The days following Michael's phone call blur together in a haze of disbelief and grief. I called in sick to work for the first time in 5 years, unable to face my colleagues' sympathetic looks when they asked about wedding preparations. How do you explain to people that your only child has uninvited you from his wedding? How do you maintain your dignity when your world has just collapsed? I spent those first few days in a cycle of emotions that felt like the 5 stages of grief compressed into an endless loop. Denial came first. Surely this was just a misunderstanding. Michael would call back, maybe even show up at my door with flowers and an apology. He'd explain that Sarah had pressured him, that he'd never wanted to exclude me, that it was all a terrible mistake. But as the days passed without any contact, denial gave way to anger, the kind of rage that burns in your chest and makes you want to scream at the unfairness of it all. I found myself furious not just at Michael, but at everyone who had failed him. David, for abandoning him and leaving me to raise him alone. Tom, for not trying harder to be the father figure Michael needed. Sarah, for turning my son against me with her upper-class values and barely concealed disdain for my working-class background. Most of all, I was angry at myself. Where had I gone wrong? I replayed every parenting decision, every conversation, every moment of his childhood, looking for the mistake that had led us here. Had I been too clingy, too supportive? Had I failed to prepare him for the real world by sheltering him too much? My neighbor, Mrs. Chen, found me crying in my garden on the 3rd day. She'd been watering her roses when she heard me sobbing behind the fence. "Margaret, dear, what's wrong?" she asked, her voice full of genuine concern. Through my tears, I told her everything. Miss Chen, who had raised 4 children and buried a husband, listened without judgment. When I finished, she sat quietly for a moment before speaking. "My eldest son didn't speak to me for 2 years after his wedding," she said softly. "His wife convinced him I was too traditional, too old-fashioned. She wanted him to embrace American ways completely, to leave his Chinese heritage behind." "What did you do?" I asked, desperately, hoping for a solution. "I waited. I sent birthday cards he didn't acknowledge. I made his favorite dumplings and left them on his doorstep. I showed up at his children's school plays even when he pretended not to see me." Eventually, his wife grew tired of the battle, and he realized that cutting out family doesn't make you more American. It just makes you alone. Her story gave me hope, but also highlighted the painful reality of my situation. Mrs. Chen had grandchildren to motivate her persistence. I had nothing except a son who seemed determined to erase me from his life. The bargaining phase came next. I drafted dozens of letters I never sent, rehearsed phone calls I never made. I considered reaching out to David, thinking maybe he could talk sense into Michael. I even looked up Sarah's office number, imagining myself calling to plead my case. But each time I reached for the phone, I stopped myself. My pride wouldn't let me beg for a place in my own son's life. Depression settled in like a heavy blanket. I found myself unable to eat, sleeping 15 hours a day, avoiding friends and family who might ask about the wedding. My sister Linda called repeatedly, but I couldn't bring myself to answer. How do you tell your sister that your perfect son, the one you've bragged about for 32 years, has decided you're not good enough for his new life? It was during this dark period that I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to watch the live stream. Not because I was invited, not because I was welcome, but because he was still my son. I had earned the right to witness his wedding day, even if I had to do it from the outside looking in. I spent the week leading up to the wedding preparing like I was attending in person. I bought a new dress, navy blue with small white flowers, the kind of dress a mother of the groom should wear. I got my hair done, had my nails manicured, even bought new shoes I'd never wear again. If I was going to watch my son get married alone in my apartment, I was going to do it with dignity. The morning of the wedding, I set up my laptop on the dining room table, angled so I could see the screen clearly. I made coffee in my best china cup, arranged some flowers from my garden in a vase, and put on the dress I'd bought for an occasion I'd never attend. As I waited for the live stream to begin, I realized this moment would define the rest of our relationship. How I handled watching my son's wedding from exile would determine whether this was the end of our story or just a painful chapter in a longer journey back to each other. The link went live at 2:07 p.m. I clicked it with trembling fingers, not knowing that what I was about to witness would change not just how I saw my son, but how I saw myself. The live stream begins at exactly 2:00 p.m. I clicked the link with hands that shook so violently I almost missed the mouse button. The screen flickered to life, and suddenly I was looking at the Riverside Country Club's elegant outdoor pavilion. My breath caught in my throat as I took in the scene before me. This was no small, intimate gathering. The venue was decorated with thousands of dollars worth of white roses and baby's breath, with silk ribbons draped from every available surface. Crystal chandeliers hung from the pavilion ceiling, casting prismatic rainbows across the assembled guests. Professional photographers moved discreetly through the crowd, capturing every angle of what was clearly an elaborate, expensive celebration. I counted the guests as the camera panned across the audience. 20 people. More like 80. I recognized some faces from Michael's college years, colleagues from his firm. Sarah's extended family sprawled across the first several rows like royalty holding court. The women were dressed in designer gowns that cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. The men wore tailored suits that spoke of personal shoppers and expense accounts. And there, in the front row, sat David. My ex-husband looked distinguished in his navy suit, his silver hair perfectly styled, his arm casually draped around his wife Elena, the secretary who had destroyed our marriage. She wore a stunning emerald dress that complemented her still blonde hair, her smile radiant as she chatted with Sarah's parents. The irony hit me like a physical blow. David, who had missed soccer games and parent-teacher conferences, who had abandoned his son when things got difficult, who had sent sporadic child support checks and forgotten birthdays, he was sitting in the front row at the wedding I was deemed too problematic to attend. The processional music began, and my heart lurched as I watched the wedding party make their way down the aisle. Sarah's sister served as maid of honor, followed by 5 bridesmaids in flowing lavender dresses. Each one was young, beautiful, and sophisticated, the kind of women who belonged in Sarah's world, not mine. Then came the groomsmen, and I barely recognized my son's friends in their formal attire. These were boys I had fed countless meals to, boys who had slept over at our house and called me Mom Williams. Now they walked with the confident stride of successful young men who had clearly moved beyond their humble beginnings. Michael appeared at the altar, and my breath caught. He looked so handsome in his black tuxedo, his hair styled differently than I remembered, more polished, more refined. But it was his expression that broke my heart. He looked nervous, yes, but also different. There was a hardness around his eyes I'd never seen before, a distance that went beyond wedding day jitters. Sarah's entrance was everything a bride should be. She was radiant in a dress that probably cost more than my car, her veil flowing behind her like something from a fairy tale. Her father, a distinguished man I'd met only once, walked her down the aisle with the pride of someone who had never doubted his place in his daughter's life. As Sarah joined Michael at the altar, I watched my son's face transform. The nervous tension melted away, replaced by a look of pure adoration. This was the face I remembered from his childhood, the openness and joy I thought had been lost forever. But he had simply reserved it for someone else. The officiant was someone from Sarah's family church, not Pastor Williams from the community church where Michael had been baptized and confirmed. Another small erasure of the life we had built together. Another signal that this wedding was about moving forward, not honoring the past. As the ceremony began, I found myself studying every detail through the screen. The flowers, white roses imported from Ecuador, not the mixed bouquets I had suggested. The music, a string quartet playing classical pieces, not the contemporary Christian songs Michael had grown up with. Even the vows, when they came, were formal and traditional, written by someone else rather than from the heart. But it was the moment during the exchange of rings that broke something inside me. The officiant asked if anyone had anything to share about the couple's journey together, and David stood up. My ex-husband walked to the microphone with the confidence of someone who belonged there, someone whose presence was not just welcomed, but celebrated. "I want to share how proud I am of my son Michael," David began, his voice carrying clearly through the speakers. "Watching him grow into the man he is today, seeing him find his place in the world and choose such a wonderful partner, it fills a father's heart with joy." The audience murmured approvingly, and I saw Michael's face light up with a happiness I hadn't seen in years. This was the father's approval he had always craved, the validation he had never received growing up. And David was taking credit for the man Michael had become, the man I had shaped through years of sacrifice and unwavering support. "Sarah, you're not just gaining a husband," David continued. "You're gaining a family who will love and support you always. We couldn't be more thrilled to welcome you into our lives, our family, our lives. As if I had never existed, as if 18 years of single motherhood had been erased with a few carefully chosen words." As David sat down to enthusiastic applause, I realized this wasn't just about me being excluded from a wedding. This was about the systematic rewriting of Michael's history, the careful construction of a new narrative that had no place for the woman who had actually raised him. But I also realized something else as I watched the scene unfold on my laptop screen. This beautiful, expensive, perfectly orchestrated event, it wasn't really about Michael at all. It was about Sarah's vision of what their life should look like, and Michael was playing the role she had written for him. The question was, did he even realize it? Memories and revelations. As the ceremony continued on my laptop screen, I found myself drifting between the present moment and the flood of memories that each sight and sound triggered. When Michael and Sarah exchanged rings, I remembered the day he had saved his allowance for 3 months to buy me a small silver ring for Mother's Day when he was 8. "It's not much, Mom," he had said, "but it's all mine to give you." That ring sat in my jewelry box upstairs, tarnished now but still precious. I wondered if he even remembered giving it to me, or if that memory had been filed away with all the other inconvenient reminders of who he used to be. The string quartet began playing Canon in D as Sarah and Michael lit their unity candle, and I was transported back to his 5th grade music concert. He had been so nervous about his solo on the recorder, practicing the same simple melody over and over until I thought I might go insane from hearing it. But when the night came, he had played it perfectly, and I had cried with pride in the back of the school auditorium. After the concert, he had run to me with his arms wide open, not caring that his friends might see him hugging his mother. "Did you hear me, Mom? Did I do good?" he had asked, and I had told him he was the most talented boy in the world. Now, watching him stand so formally at the altar, I couldn't remember the last time he had asked for my approval or seemed to care about my opinion. When had my praise stopped mattering to him? When had he stopped needing me to tell him he was good enough? The officiant began the traditional wedding ceremony speech about marriage being a union, not just of 2 people, but of 2 families. I watched Sarah's relatives nod approvingly, while David and Elena smiled as if they had been integral parts of Michael's life all along. The hypocrisy was staggering. These people who had contributed nothing to Michael's development were now basking in the glory of his success, while I sat alone in my apartment, watching through a computer screen like a stranger. During the exchange of vows, Sarah spoke eloquently about how Michael had elevated her perspective on life and how he had shown her what it meant to rise above circumstances. The word stung because I knew exactly what she meant. Michael had risen above his circumstances, meaning me, meaning our modest home, meaning the working-class life that had shaped him. Michael's vows were equally revealing. He spoke about finding his true family and about leaving the past behind to build something beautiful and new. Each word felt like a small knife to my heart. I was the past he was leaving behind. I was the circumstance he had risen above. But as I listened more carefully, I began to hear something else in his words. They sounded rehearsed, almost scripted. This wasn't the Michael who used to tell me everything, who had never been able to hide his feelings from me. This was someone playing a role, saying what was expected of him. The more I watched, the more I began to notice the subtle signs of stress in my son's behavior. The way he kept glancing at Sarah for approval before speaking, the forced smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, the stiff posture that suggested he was performing rather than simply being himself. I recognized these signs because I had seen them before, during his brief rebellious phase in high school, when he had tried to fit in with a group of wealthy kids whose parents looked down on our family. He had come home exhausted every day from the effort of pretending to be someone he wasn't, until, finally, he had broken down and admitted that he felt like a fraud. "I don't know how to be like them, Mom," he had sobbed into my shoulder. "I don't know the right things to say or wear or do. I feel like I'm always messing up." I had held him that night and told him he never needed to be anyone other than himself, that the right people would love him for who he was, not who he pretended to be. I thought he had learned that lesson. But watching him now, I realized he had simply gotten better at pretending. The ceremony reached its climax as the officiant pronounced them husband and wife. Michael kissed Sarah with what looked like genuine affection, and the crowd erupted in applause. But I caught something in that moment that no one else seemed to notice, a brief flicker of uncertainty in Michael's eyes, a moment where the mask slipped and I saw the confused, overwhelmed boy I had raised. As the newlyweds walked back down the aisle together, Sarah's hand possessively gripping Michael's arm, I began to understand what was really happening. This wasn't just about excluding me from a wedding. This was about Sarah's systematic isolation of Michael from anything that reminded him of his authentic self. I had seen this pattern before in my work as a nurse. Abusive partners often began by cutting their victims off from family and friends, making them entirely dependent on the relationship for validation and support. It was subtle at first, comments about how family was holding them back or friends were not good enough for their new status. Eventually, the victim found themselves completely isolated, with no one left to reflect back who they really were. The reception was beginning, and I watched as the wedding party gathered for photos. Sarah directed the photographer with military precision, specifying exactly who should be in each shot. I noticed that every photo included David and Elena, while there wasn't a single image that acknowledged my existence or role in Michael's life. But I also noticed something else. In the candid moments between post shots when Sarah was distracted by logistics, Michael's shoulders would relax slightly. He would laugh more naturally. His smile would become more genuine. These brief glimpses of my real son gave me hope that he was still in there somewhere, buried beneath the expectations and performance. As the camera captured the couple's first dance, I made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to sit here passively watching my son disappear into a life that was slowly erasing him. I wasn't going to let Sarah's calculated exclusion be the end of our story. If Michael needed to be reminded of who he really was, then I was going to remind him, but not through confrontation or drama. Sarah would be expecting that. I was going to do it the same way I had always reached him, through love, patience, and the kind of unwavering presence that had gotten us through every crisis we had faced together. The live stream was far from over, but my passive acceptance of this situation was finished. It was time to stop watching from the sidelines and start fighting for my son. The truth about small. As the reception continued, my laptop screen revealed the true scope of what Michael had called a small, intimate gathering. The camera panned across a lavish cocktail hour with past hors d'oeuvres, a full premium bar, and what appeared to be a jazz trio playing background music. This was no modest celebration. This was a production that had likely cost more than most people's annual salaries. I began taking screenshots, documenting what I was seeing, not out of spite but out of a growing realization that I needed evidence of the elaborate nature of this supposedly intimate affair. The cognitive dissonance between Michael's description and reality was so stark that I questioned my own memory of our phone conversation. The bridal party photos alone told a story of careful social engineering. Sarah had positioned herself at the center of every shot, with Michael's college friends and work colleagues arranged around her like courtiers. But it was the family photos that revealed the most. David and Elena were prominently featured in multiple groupings, often positioned closer to the couple than some of the actual wedding party members. In one particularly telling shot, the photographer gathered the groom's family for a formal portrait. David and Elena flanked Michael and Sarah, with Elena's hand resting possessively on Michael's shoulder. They looked like the perfect family unit, successful, attractive, and seamlessly integrated into Sarah's social circle. The absence of any reference to me wasn't just an oversight, it was a deliberate erasure. As the cocktail hour transitioned into dinner, I watched the seating arrangements with growing fascination. The head table included the bride and groom, Sarah's parents, David and Elena, and Sarah's siblings. This was supposedly a small wedding, yet there were at least 10 tables of 8 people each. My rough count put the guest list at nearly 100 people. The more I observed, the more I understood the careful choreography of this event. Sarah's friends dominated the guest list, polished couples who looked like they'd stepped out of a country club magazine. Michael's college buddies were there, but they seemed subdued, almost intimidated by the formality of the occasion. These were the same boys who used to eat pizza on my living room floor and argue about sports statistics until midnight. Now they sat quietly in their rented tuxedos, playing the roles Sarah had assigned them. During the dinner service, the camera captured conversations at various tables, and I strained to hear familiar voices. When it focused on Michael's college friends, I caught fragments that made my heart race. "Haven't seen his mom in months," one of them was saying quietly. "Sarah thinks she's too..." The response was lost as the camera moved away, but I had heard enough. Even Michael's friends had noticed my absence, had questions about why I wasn't there. This wasn't the natural distancing of a son from an overbearing mother. This was something more calculated. The father of the bride's speech provided another piece of the puzzle. Mr. Collins spoke eloquently about welcoming Michael into their family, about how proud they were of Sarah's choice in a husband. He mentioned Michael's professional achievements, his education, his bright future ahead. But there was a subtle undercurrent to his words that revealed the class dynamics at play. "Michael has shown remarkable adaptability," Mr. Collins said, raising his champagne flute. He's embraced our family's values and traditions with such grace. We couldn't have asked for a better son-in-law. Adaptability. The word hit me like a slap. Michael hadn't just married Sarah. He had adapted to her family's expectations, molded himself into their vision of an acceptable husband for their daughter, and part of that adaptation involved distancing himself from anything that didn't fit their narrative. When David stood to give his speech, the performance reached its crescendo. My ex-husband, who had been largely absent from Michael's life for 2 decades, spoke as if he had been an integral part of raising our son. I remember teaching Michael to throw a baseball in their backyard, David began, and I nearly laughed out loud at the audacity. I had been the one teaching Michael to throw in the small patch of grass behind our duplex after long shifts at the hospital. David had been too busy with his secretary to notice that his son was learning to play catch. I'm so proud of the man he's become, David continued, and I know his late mother would be proud too. The words hit me like a physical blow. His late mother. David was speaking as if I were dead. Not absent by choice, not excluded from the wedding, but dead. The lie was so outrageous, so completely fabricated, that for a moment I wondered if I was hallucinating. But then I saw the reactions around the room. Sarah's family nodded sympathetically, clearly believing they were witnessing a touching tribute to a deceased parent. Some of Michael's friends looked confused, but none of them spoke up to correct the record. And Michael sat frozen, his face pale, his eyes fixed on his plate. He wasn't correcting his father's lie. He was allowing everyone in that room to believe I was dead, rather than admit I had been excluded from his wedding. The realization hit me with devastating clarity. This wasn't just about social climbing or impressing Sarah's family. This was about complete reinvention. Michael and Sarah had created a new narrative for his life, one that required my complete erasure. I wasn't just uninvited, I was being systematically deleted from his history. As David's speech continued, weaving more lies about his devoted fatherhood and his grief over losing his wife, I felt something shift inside me. The hurt and confusion that had consumed me all week was crystallizing into something else entirely: determination. They thought they could rewrite history, pretend I had never existed, erase 18 years of single motherhood and sacrifice. They thought they could kill me off with words and move forward as if I had never been the most important person in Michael's life. But I was very much alive, and I had evidence of everything I was witnessing. More importantly, I had 32 years of memories, photographs, and experiences that proved exactly who had raised Michael Williams. If they wanted to play games with truth and family history, they had chosen the wrong opponent. As I watched my son sit silently while his father buried me with lies, I realized this was no longer about getting an invitation to a wedding. This was about fighting for the truth, for Michael's authentic self, and for the relationship that had defined both of our lives. The battle was just beginning. The emotional turning point. As David's fabricated eulogy continued, I watched my son's face on the screen with the intensity of a mother who had spent 32 years reading his every expression. The color had drained from his cheeks, and his hands gripped his champagne flute so tightly I feared it might shatter. He looked like a man trapped in a nightmare, unable to wake up or speak out. This was the moment I realized that Michael wasn't the architect of my exclusion. He was another victim of it. Sarah and David had orchestrated this elaborate deception together, and my son was caught in the middle, too paralyzed by social pressure and fear to tell the truth. The camera caught a brief moment when Sarah leaned over to whisper something in Michael's ear, her hand gripping his arm with what looked like affection, but felt like control. Whatever she said made him nod stiffly and paste a smile back on his face, but I could see the effort it took. As David concluded his speech to thunderous applause, I noticed several of Michael's college friends exchanging glances. They knew the truth. They had met me, eaten at my table, called me when Michael was too drunk to drive home safely. But they were also guests at what was clearly an expensive high society wedding, and challenging the father of the groom's speech would have been social suicide. The evening continued with more elaborate touches that belied the small gathering description. A professional DJ took over from the jazz trio, and the dance floor filled with couples who moved with the practiced ease of people accustomed to country club events. Sarah and Michael's first dance was picture perfect, but I could see the tension in my son's posture, the way he held himself like he was afraid of making a mistake. It was during the cake cutting that I witnessed the moment that would change everything. As Sarah guided Michael's hand to cut the first slice of their elaborate three-tiered cake, she made a comment that the microphone picked up clearly. "Just like we practiced, darling," she said with a laugh that sounded playful to the guests but carried an edge of control that made my skin crawl. "We can't have any mistakes on camera." The phrase hit me like a revelation. This entire wedding wasn't just about celebrating their love. It was a performance, carefully choreographed and controlled by Sarah. Every moment was scripted, every interaction managed, every detail designed to create a specific image. As the dancing continued, I began to notice other troubling patterns. When Michael tried to join his college friends at their table, Sarah would appear within minutes, gently but firmly redirecting him back to their obligations. When he laughed too loudly at one of his friend's jokes, she would touch his arm and whisper something that immediately sobered him. The most telling moment came during the bouquet toss. As Sarah prepared to throw her flowers to the gathered single women, she turned to scan the crowd and her eyes landed on the camera. For just a moment her mask slipped, and I saw something cold and calculating in her expression. She knew I was watching. She knew I could see everything. And then she smiled directly at the camera, at me, with the triumphant look of someone who had won a game I hadn't even realized we were playing. That smile crystallized everything for me. This wasn't accidental exclusion or poor communication. This was a deliberate campaign to erase me from Michael's life, and Sarah was orchestrating every move. She had convinced my son that cutting ties with me was necessary for their social advancement, and she was using his insecurities about his background to manipulate him into compliance. But she had made one crucial mistake. She had underestimated a mother's love and determination. As the reception wound down and the camera prepared to end the live stream, I began formulating my response. I wouldn't storm the venue or create a scene. That would only confirm Sarah's narrative about me being dramatic and inappropriate. Instead, I would do something that would force Michael to confront the truth about what he had allowed to happen. I spent the rest of the evening gathering evidence. I saved every screenshot I had taken, bookmarked the live stream recording, and began compiling a timeline of events. But more importantly, I began crafting a plan that would remind Michael of who he really was and what we had meant to each other. The next morning, I drove to the storage unit where I kept boxes of Michael's childhood belongings, items I had saved for years, thinking he might want them someday when he had children of his own. I pulled out photo albums, report cards, letters he had written me from summer camp, artwork from elementary school, and his collection of participation trophies from Little League. But the most important item was a small wooden box Michael had made in 7th grade shop class. Inside were all the Mother's Day cards he had given me over the years, each one filled with heartfelt messages about how much he loved me and how grateful he was for everything I had done for him. The card from his senior year of high school was particularly poignant. "Mom, I know I don't say it enough, but you are my hero. Everything good about me comes from you. I promise I will never forget how much you sacrificed for me, and I will spend the rest of my life making you proud. I love you more than words can say. Your devoted son, Michael." As I read his words, tears streaming down my face, I realized this was bigger than just my relationship with Michael. This was about helping him remember who he was before Sarah and her family began reshaping him into someone else. This was about saving my son from losing himself completely in the pursuit of social acceptance. The live stream had ended, but my story was just beginning. It was time to remind Michael Williams that some relationships are too important to be sacrificed for anyone's idea of the perfect life. The war for my son's soul was about to begin, taking action. The Monday after the wedding, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in months. The grief and confusion that had consumed me were gone, replaced by a mother's fierce determination to fight for her child. I had spent the weekend analyzing every moment of the live stream, and I knew exactly what I needed to do. My first stop was the office of my longtime family lawyer, Robert Martinez. Bob had handled my divorce from David and had been a trusted advisor for over 20 years. He listened patiently as I explained the situation, showing him the screenshots and video clips I had compiled. "Margaret, I need to ask you something difficult," Bob said after reviewing the evidence. "Are you certain you want to pursue this? Once you take legal action, there's no going back." "What do you mean, legal action?" I asked, confused. "David committed defamation when he publicly stated you were deceased. He did this in front of nearly 100 witnesses, and it was recorded on video. You have grounds for a lawsuit that could be quite substantial, especially given the damage to your reputation and emotional distress." The idea hadn't occurred to me, but as Bob explained the legal implications, I realized David's lie had been more than just hurtful. It had been potentially libelous. People who knew me would now question my absence from the wedding, and some might actually believe I had died. "I don't want money," I told Bob. "I want the truth to come out. I want Michael to understand what really happened." "Sometimes legal action is the only way to force people to face consequences for their actions," Bob replied. "But there might be other approaches that would be more effective for your specific goals." Over the next few days, I developed a multi-pronged strategy. First, I would document everything, create a comprehensive record of my role in Michael's life that couldn't be disputed or erased. Second, I would reach out to people who knew the truth and ask them to help me reconnect with my son. Third, I would force a confrontation, but on my terms and in a way that would make it impossible for Sarah to spin as dramatics. I started with documentation. I spent hours scanning photographs, report cards, medical records, and other evidence of my 18 years as Michael's primary parent. I created a detailed timeline of our relationship, including dates, events, and witnesses who could corroborate my story. The evidence was overwhelming. I had been not just present, but central to every important moment of Michael's life until he met Sarah. Next, I reached out to people from Michael's past. I called his high school guidance counselor, who remembered me well from our many meetings about Michael's college applications. I contacted his Little League coach, who had my phone number in his records as the primary emergency contact for 8 years. I even reached out to some of his college professors, who remembered the proud mother who had attended every graduation ceremony. Each conversation reinforced the same truth. Everyone who had known Michael during his formative years knew me as his devoted, involved mother. The narrative that I was absent or problematic was completely fabricated. The breakthrough came when I contacted Mrs. Patterson, Michael's third-grade teacher who had become a family friend over the years. She was horrified when I told her about the wedding and David's claim that I was dead. "Margaret, this is unconscionable," she said. "I have photos of you at every school event, parent-teacher conferences, field trips. You were the most involved parent I've ever worked with. How can they pretend you don't exist?" Mrs. Patterson's reaction gave me an idea. I began reaching out to other teachers, coaches, and family friends, asking them to share their memories of me and Michael. The response was overwhelming. Within a week, I had dozens of testimonials from people who had witnessed my devotion to my son. But the most powerful testimony came from an unexpected source, Tom, my second husband. I hadn't spoken to him in years, but when I called to explain the situation, he was immediately supportive. "Margaret, you were an incredible mother," he said. "One of the reasons our marriage ended was because I felt like I could never compete with the bond you and Michael shared. You gave that boy everything you had. For him to exclude you from his wedding is not just wrong, it's heartbreaking." Tom's words reminded me of something important. The problem wasn't that I had been too involved or too loving. The problem was that Sarah saw my close relationship with Michael as a threat to her control over him. Armed with this understanding, I crafted a plan for the confrontation. I wouldn't show up at their honeymoon return or create a public scene. Instead, I would force Michael to come to me, on neutral ground, with witnesses who could attest to the truth of our relationship. I organized a surprise gathering at the community center, where Michael had played basketball as a child. I invited 20 people who had been important in his life, teachers, coaches, family friends, and neighbors. I told them I wanted to celebrate Michael's wedding and share memories of his childhood, but I didn't mention that he had excluded me from the ceremony. The invitations went out with a simple message: "Join us for a celebration of Michael Williams and a trip down memory lane. Light refreshments and lots of love provided." I included the date, time, and location and asked people to RSVP. The response was immediate and enthusiastic. Everyone wanted to celebrate Michael and share their favorite memories. Mrs. Patterson offered to bring the photo albums she had kept from his elementary school years. Coach Rodriguez promised to bring the trophy from the championship game where Michael had hit the winning home run. Tom even volunteered to help set up tables and chairs. But the most important part of my plan was the final invitation, the one I would send to Michael himself. It would be simple and heartfelt, with no mention of the wedding or the lies that had been told. Just a mother asking her son to come celebrate with the people who had loved him since childhood. As I addressed the envelope to Michael and Sarah's new address, I felt a mixture of hope and terror. This gathering would force Michael to confront the reality of who had actually been there for him throughout his life. It would also give Sarah a chance to see the depth of love and support that existed for her husband in his hometown. Most importantly, it would give me one last chance to reach my son before he disappeared completely into the life Sarah had designed for him. I mailed the invitation on a Thursday, knowing they would receive it after their honeymoon. The gathering was scheduled for the following Saturday, exactly 2 weeks after the wedding I had watched from my apartment. As I dropped the envelope in the mailbox, I whispered a prayer that the boy I had raised was still somewhere inside the man he had become. This was my final gambit, my last attempt to save our relationship before accepting that I had lost him forever. The invitation was in the mail. Now, all I could do was wait and hope that love would prove stronger than manipulation. The confrontation. The community center had never looked more beautiful. Mrs. Patterson had arrived early with decorations, not wedding-themed, but celebration of life-themed. balloons in Michael's favorite colors, photo displays chronicling his childhood achievements, and a banner that read, "Celebrating Michael Williams, our hometown hero." By 2 p.m., 23 people had gathered in the small hall where Michael had once played youth basketball. The atmosphere was warm and nostalgic, filled with the kind of genuine affection that can't be manufactured or bought. Coach Rodriguez brought his trophy case, displaying the awards Michael had earned in Little League and high school baseball. Mrs. Patterson had created a timeline of Michael's academic achievements, complete with photos and report cards. Tom had outdone himself with the refreshment table, featuring all of Michael's childhood favorites: chocolate chip cookies made from my grandmother's recipe, the potato salad he had requested for every birthday party, and even the specific brand of punch he had preferred at school celebrations. At 2:30, exactly 30 minutes after the event was scheduled to begin, Michael and Sarah arrived. I watched through the window as they sat in their car for several minutes, clearly having a heated discussion. Sarah was gesturing emphatically, her face flushed with anger. Michael looked tired and conflicted, his hands gripping the steering wheel as he stared at the building where he had spent so many happy hours as a child. Finally, they got out of the car and walked toward the entrance. Sarah wore a designer dress that was completely inappropriate for a community center gathering. She looked like she was attending a charity gala rather than a casual celebration. Michael wore khakis and a polo shirt, but even his casual clothes looked expensive and carefully chosen. The moment they walked through the door, the room fell silent. Everyone could feel the tension, the weight of unspoken conflicts and hidden truths. Michael's face went pale as he took in the scene. All these people from his past gathered together in the place where he had learned to play basketball, where he had attended school dances, where he had celebrated so many milestones of his youth. "Surprise!" Mrs. Patterson called out, breaking the awkward silence. "We wanted to celebrate your wedding and share some wonderful memories." Michael's eyes found mine across the room, and for a moment I saw the boy I had raised, confused, overwhelmed, and looking to his mother for guidance. But then Sarah's hand tightened on his arm, and his expression hardened. "This is lovely," Sarah said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "But we weren't expecting a party. We just stopped by because Michael received the invitation and was curious." Coach Rodriguez stepped forward with a warm smile. "Michael, you remember Mrs. Patterson from elementary school, and Tom and the Johnsons from down the street. We all have so many wonderful stories about watching you grow up." "Actually," Sarah interjected smoothly, "we can't stay long. We have dinner plans with my parents." But Mrs. Patterson was already pulling out her photo albums, and the crowd was gathering around Michael with genuine enthusiasm. For the next hour, despite Sarah's obvious discomfort, Michael was surrounded by people who remembered him as a child, who had witnessed his achievements and supported his dreams. The turning point came when Coach Rodriguez pulled out a photograph from Michael's senior year of high school. It showed Michael in his baseball uniform, holding his trophy for Most Valuable Player, with me standing beside him beaming with pride. "This was taken the day Michael got his scholarship to state," Coach Rodriguez announced to the group. "I'll never forget how proud his mom was. She worked double shifts for months to pay for his equipment and travel expenses. Best parent I ever coached with." The room murmured in agreement, and several people began sharing their own memories of my dedication to Michael's activities. Sarah's face grew increasingly pale as story after story highlighted my central role in Michael's upbringing. "I remember when Margaret drove Michael to practice every day for 3 months when her car broke down," added Mrs. Johnson. "She walked 4 miles each way rather than let him miss a single session. And the time she took extra shifts to pay for his class trip to Washington, D.C., chimed in Mrs. Patterson. She said education was the most important gift she could give him. Michael stood frozen in the center of the group, his face cycling through emotions as each story reinforced the reality of our relationship. These weren't embellished tales or recovered memories. These were documented facts, witnessed by multiple people, supported by photographs and physical evidence. Finally, Tom stepped forward with the wooden box Michael had made in shop class. "Your mom asked me to bring this," he said quietly. "She thought you might like to see it again." Michael's hands trembled as he opened the box and saw the Mother's Day cards he had written over the years. He pulled out the one from his senior year and read it silently, his face crumbling as he absorbed his own words of love and gratitude. That's when Sarah made her fatal mistake. "This is ridiculous," she snapped, her composure finally cracking. "Michael, we need to leave. These people are living in the past, trying to guilt you into some outdated version of family obligation." The room went dead silent. 23 people who had known and loved Michael since childhood stared at this woman who had just dismissed their genuine affection as manipulation. Mrs. Patterson, all 5 feet of her, stepped forward with the quiet authority of someone who had taught children for 40 years. "Young lady, I don't know who you think you are, but that woman," she pointed at me, "raised one of the finest young men I've ever had the privilege to know. She sacrificed everything for his success, and she deserves respect, not dismissal." "She's holding him back," Sarah replied, her voice rising. "Michael needs to move forward, not stay trapped in some small-town mentality." "Is that what you think this is?" Coach Rodriguez asked, his voice quiet but firm. "Small-town mentality, love and loyalty and remembering where you came from?" Michael finally found his voice. "Sarah, stop. Please." But Sarah was beyond stopping. Years of carefully maintained composure exploded in a torrent of frustrated words. "These people don't understand what we're building together. They don't understand that sometimes you have to make hard choices about who belongs in your new life." The truth was finally out in the open. Sarah hadn't just excluded me from the wedding. She had convinced Michael that loving me was somehow incompatible with their future together. Michael looked around the room at all the faces of people who had shaped his childhood, who had celebrated his victories and supported him through challenges. Then he looked at his wife, standing alone in her designer dress, isolated by her own contempt for everything and everyone that had made him who he was. "I need some air," he said quietly, and walked out of the community center. I followed him outside, leaving Sarah to face the silent judgment of 23 people who now understood exactly what kind of person she was. In the parking lot, my son stood with his back to me, his shoulders shaking with suppressed emotion. When I approached, he turned around, and I saw tears streaming down his face. "Mom," he whispered, "what have I done?" "You came back to me," I said simply, opening my arms to the son I thought I had lost forever. Michael collapsed into my embrace like the frightened child he had once been, his whole body shaking with grief and relief. We stood in that parking lot, holding each other while years of manipulation and lies crumbled around us. "I'm so sorry, Mom," he sobbed into my shoulder. "I'm so sorry for everything. The wedding, the lies, letting Dad say you were dead. I don't know how I let it get so far." I stroked his hair the way I had when he was small and had nightmares. "Shh, sweetheart. You're here now. That's all that matters." But even as I comforted him, I could see Sarah through the window, arguing with the guests inside. This reconciliation was far from over. It was just beginning. "She's going to be furious," Michael said, pulling back to look at me with eyes that seemed older than they had 2 hours ago. "Are you afraid of her?" I asked gently. The question seemed to surprise him. He thought about it for a long moment before answering. "Yes, I am. I'm afraid of disappointing her, afraid of not being good enough for her family, afraid of... He trailed off, seeming to realize something important. Afraid of what, honey? Afraid of not being the person she wants me to be. He looked back at the community center, where people who had known him since childhood were still gathered. When did I become so afraid of being myself? This was the breakthrough I had been hoping for. Michael was finally recognizing the cage he had built around himself in pursuit of Sarah's approval. You don't have to be afraid anymore, I told him. These people in there, they love you for who you are, not who you're trying to become. Sarah emerged from the building, her face flushed with anger and humiliation. She had clearly not enjoyed being confronted by a room full of people who saw through her manipulation. Michael, we're leaving. Now, she demanded, her voice sharp with authority. For a moment, I saw the old pattern reassert itself. Michael's shoulders tensed and he took a step toward her, conditioned to obey her commands. But then he stopped and looked back at me. No, he said quietly. Excuse me? Sarah's voice could have cut glass. I said no, I'm staying here with my mom and the people who actually know me. Sarah's mask slipped completely. These people are beneath us, Michael. They're small-town nobodies who will never understand what we're trying to build together. What are we trying to build? Michael asked, his voice growing stronger. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like we're trying to build a life that requires me to pretend my mother is dead. That was your father's idea, not mine, Sarah snapped. But the lie was transparent. You were right there when he said it. You let everyone believe it. You probably planned it. Michael's voice was filled with a dawning realization. You've been planning this for months, haven't you? Getting rid of my mom, cutting me off from everyone who knew me before you. Sarah's silence was answer enough. I want to know something, Michael continued, his voice steady now. Do you love me, or do you love the version of me you've been trying to create? Don't be ridiculous, Sarah replied, but her hesitation spoke volumes. Answer the question. If I went back to calling my mom every Sunday, if I wanted to have dinner with my high school friends, if I wanted to live in a regular house instead of that show place you picked out, would you still love me? Sarah's face revealed the truth before she spoke. The idea of Michael returning to his authentic self was clearly repugnant to her. I fell in love with the man you've become, she said carefully. Not the boy you used to be. Those are the same person, Michael replied. The boy I used to be is still inside me, and he's the best part of who I am. This was the moment I realized my son was truly coming back to himself. The confident, manipulative woman who had convinced him to exclude his own mother from his wedding was being confronted by the man she had tried to mold, and he was choosing authenticity over acceptance. If you go back to your old life, you'll lose everything we've built together, Sarah warned. My family, our social circle, the opportunities that come with being part of our world. Oh, what opportunities? Michael asked. The opportunity to pretend my mother is dead? The opportunity to cut ties with everyone who actually cares about me? The opportunity to spend the rest of my life performing a role instead of living authentically? Sarah realized she was losing control of the situation. Her voice took on a pleading tone I had never heard from her before. Michael, please. We're married now. We made vows to each other. You made me make vows to a version of myself that doesn't exist, Michael replied. You made me promise to leave my past behind, to cut ties with my family, to become someone I'm not. Those weren't wedding vows. They were terms of surrender. As I watched this confrontation unfold, I felt a mixture of pride and heartbreak. Pride in my son for finally standing up for himself and for our relationship. Heartbreak for the realization that his marriage was built on such a fundamental deception. What happens now? I asked quietly when Sarah had stormed off to her car. Michael looked at the community center, where his childhood friends and mentors were still gathered. waiting to see how this drama would resolve. Then he looked at me, and for the first time in months, I saw the clear, honest eyes of the boy I had raised. "Now, I figure out how to fix the mess I've made," he said, "starting with the most important relationship in my life." He took my hand and led me back toward the building. "Come on, Mom. I have some people I want to properly introduce to my mother." As we walked back into the community center together, the crowd broke into spontaneous applause. These weren't people celebrating the end of a marriage. They were people celebrating the return of someone they loved to his authentic self. Mrs. Patterson wiped tears from her eyes as she hugged us both. "Welcome home, Michael," she said. "We've missed you." Later that evening, as we sat in my kitchen sharing coffee and homemade cookies, Michael asked the question I had been dreading. "How do I rebuild my life when I've destroyed so much?" "The same way you built it the first time," I replied. "One day at a time, with love and patience and the support of people who believe in you." "Will you help me?" he asked, and I heard the uncertain voice of the child who had once asked me to help him with his homework. "Always," I promised. "That's what mothers do." 6 months later, Michael moved back to our hometown and took a job with a local marketing firm. The pay was less than what he had made in the city, but his smile was genuine for the first time in years. He filed for divorce from Sarah, a process that was complicated but necessary for his emotional well-being. We have Sunday dinner together every week now, and he's rebuilding relationships with his old friends. Last month, he started dating Jennifer, a teacher at the elementary school where Mrs. Patterson used to work. She loves hearing stories about his childhood and thinks it's wonderful that he's so close to his mother. The live stream of his first wedding is still online somewhere, a digital monument to how far we can drift from ourselves in pursuit of others' approval. But it's also a reminder that love, real, unconditional, maternal love, is stronger than manipulation and more enduring than social pressure. My son came home to himself, and in doing so, he came home to me. Sometimes that's all the happy ending a story needs. What would you do if your child tried to erase you from their life? How far would you go to fight for a relationship that defined both of your lives? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories about the unbreakable bonds of family.